Our fellow community members, cultists, and those who like to party, praise the Lord that you guys are back again to indulge in the very best install videos on the planet, with today's being the GR86 FRS Super Lock Knuckles. This being the fifth, that's right, the fifth video on our kinda sorta low-key maybe, alright, Super Lock series that we've been running lately to allow you guys to have the utmost fun with your tiny little Econo pocket rocket. Now if you've seen us hanging around on the internet before, you'd know that we go to our local Chinese restaurant and steal their Lazy Susan to spin up the specials we had planned on serving, which on today's menu is going to be the Super Lock Knuckle in question. Now as you can imagine, our engineers have stuffed these turkeys with as many giblets and features as humanly possible. We even load you up with a super detailed assembly guide and alignment recommendations, as these bad units can be a handful, which we will run through in depth on our product pages and can be found on our goddang website. Hey, we also ship worldwide, so depending on where you buy these from, you can get these on any side of the flat earth that you may or may not live on. Bonus. The first step is going to be to remove the wheel from the car, otherwise it's going to be really fucking hard to install these otherwise. Now as you can see, we are upgrading our setup from the bolt-on angle kit, which has served us very well, to the big boy drop knuckles. We also sprouted 15.5 chest tears recently and started enjoying barbecues and New Balances, and I do smell a Corvette in our future. Sling your air ratchet up from your holster and wind off the brake line bracket bolt from the coilover bracket. Next up, loosen and remove the two caliper bolts, getting them out of their home and that caliper off said disc. Now a pro tip, which we've said many times in the past, go ahead and steal a coat hanger from your mom's closet, bend it into a hook, and hang that caliper to save it hanging on for dear life from the brake line, which can cause damage by the way. Whip the disc off the hub and put that heavy thing somewhere safe. Get that ratchet back out from the holster and zap off the ABS sensor bolt and remove said sensor, setting that somewhere safe. Head underneath and crack loose the inner tie rod locking nut, then wind the inner tie rod loose from the outer tie rod. Head back inside with your same weapon of choice and loosen the ball joint nut, leaving it on for now with this little circus trick. Put the same size socket on the nut, give it a little love tap with a hammer, and unseats the ball joint. Now you can proceed to remove said nut and said lower control arm from said knuckle. That's a lot of sets. Letting that dangle for now. Get that same weapon of choice from your trusty bound holster, zapping off the strut nuts, then give the assembly a little wiggle to let the bolts come out of their homes. Once removed, the knuckle should just pop out of place and you can go ahead and slide that onto a bench. Swing that ish around to reveal the bolts from the back side of the knuckle. On the other side of the holster, you best be having your favorite rattle gun do some work. Zap those things loose, then get them out of the way, then wrestle that knuckle around like it owes you money, then push that hub away from the knuckle itself. Wipe the hub down and get the goop off of it, presenting it nice and clean. Then we can bring a new home for this orphaned hub. Throw that wiped down hub on top of said beautiful knuckle, and once fitted, flip that around so we can lay some bolts through the guts. Wind the supplied Allen key bolts through the hub, winding them in one by one, preferably in a crisscross pattern, then hey, tighten them down in the same crisscross pattern, spreading that load evenly. Then, you guessed it, torque them down to the specs shown on the screen. Well, that was easy, wasn't it? Pick that puppy up and bring it over to the lower control arm, sliding it over the ball joint and winding that nut on. Tighten, then torque that thing down to the specs shown on the screen with your trusty torque wrench. Go ahead and fit that split pin and spread those wings, my guy. Now glide the knuckle towards the coilover, nestling that in place and slipping the bolts through the body of the coilover. Then throw the matching nuts on said bolts, then tighten them down with the same ratchet, and at this stage deserves an award with how much work is done, tightening and torquing them to the specs shown on the screen. Throw the extender onto the bearing, winding that on a couple turns, then winding that onto the inner tie rod as well, then winding that inwards. Now you want to wind that in as much as you can so you get as much thread engagement as humanly possible on both sides of the extender, whilst ensuring you have a minimum of 15 millimeters of thread engagement. Now assuming your steering rack has been and is centered, you want to eyeball this ish until your wheel is straight as possible. Once you're as centered as your chi should be, wind the locking nuts down until seated and then hold that main extender whilst tightening both locking nuts down nice and tight. Now we want to head over to the tie rod end side of the knuckle. If you'd done your research on these suckers, you would know that these include adjustable Ackermann. First thing you want to do is remove the bolt and lay a beautiful fat slug of thread locker on there. You do not want this going anywhere. Then wind that in, but only slightly, as you now need to decide where you want your Ackermann to be. If the Ackermann adjuster were set to face the inner position, so towards the center of the car, you would have more Ackermann, meaning more lead wheel, and less trail wheel, meaning more scrub. If you were to flip those shims the other way so that the Ackermann adjuster is facing the outer position, so away from the inside of the car, you would have less Ackermann, meaning you would have closer to parallel steering, meaning less scrub and more speed. Pick your poison based off what your friends and or the internet told you to do. You can go ahead and put that bolt in, drive it home, and tighten, then torque to the specs shown on the screen. Double check that eyeball alignment you just did after deciding what suited you best. Get your handy ABS sensor and throw that into its no home, winding the bolt to suit. Tighten, then torque to the specs on the screen. Throw that same rotor you had on, and as an obvious but handy tip to save you some minor frustration, wind a nut down on the rotor so you can line the caliper up easier. You're welcome. Unhook that caliper from our last pro tip and give that bent coat hanger back to your mom or best friend and get that caliper thrown over the disc. Wind on the top and bottom bolts, tightening and torquing them down to the specs shown on the screen with that same goddamn ratchet we've been using since the beginning. Man, that thing's handy. Get your brake line bracket and bolt, throw them up, and use our main man ratchet to tighten and torque them down also. Now, we did cover this in the lower control arm video, but being as how your knuckle has changed, you will need to reset your lock stops. Now again, I'm assuming your rack is centered, and after your wheel alignment, you want to turn the steering from side to side to check to see if A, your rack is maxing out, or B, your wheels are making contact with the chassis, or C, your tie rod to wheel clearance is being affected. Now, it does depend on your setup, obviously, and what lowers you're running and how far along the lock journey that you are, but if any of the above occurs, you want to set your lock stop to just before it hits and snug them down to the specs shown on the screen. Speaking of spiritual lock journeys, if you'd read through the product page and or assembly guide like you saw on the screen and or are a good GKTecher, then you would have noticed that the knuckles feature built-in caster trail as well as some alignment specs to follow as a guide. We recommend that you or your alignment guy reduce your caster down to about 5 degrees, which is the best for maximum grip and performance. If you wanted to have more self-steer and a more OEM feel, then you could still run the OEM caster value, but this will reduce clearance to the rear wheel well area, so keep that little gem in mind. This is best done through your strut tops, and if you have ours and paid attention to the start of the series, you'd know that we'd be covering this in the next video in full detail, as you are now becoming a pro driver with this pro setup, so hang tight. Now this part is optional depending on if your car ever plans on leaving the garage. AKA every goddamn project car that spends too many years in it without getting that vitamin D. But if you ever planned on driving, then yes, throw your wheel back on, zap that thing down, and get your friend or younger brother to just sit there and turn the steering wheel lock to lock so you and your homies can take 16 photos, drop 2 Instagram posts with hashtag blessed, 14 reels, and for some reason admiring the fact that you now become the guy of the group that has the first drop knuckles on a GR86. The setup looks great, and you're now on your way to a full-blown pro setup, my guy. Speaking of being blown, these guys are the guys that throw the vids together, which are awesome, by the way. We slave away to explain to you guys what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and what for. Now, if you don't know what you're doing, please reach out to us or have a professional install this and give you all the help and love you need. Or reach out to us with any questions you may or may not have. This has been Officer Dan, Johnny Caps, and DK with the world's best how-to videos. We'll catch you on the next one. Peace.